You slept fine last night. Lunch wasn't heavy, maybe a salad, maybe nothing at all. And yet, somewhere around the middle of the afternoon, it arrives anyway. A heaviness behind the eyes. A sentence that takes noticeably more effort to finish than it did an hour ago. The same tiredness, on almost the same schedule, day after day. Most people blame lunch. It's the obvious suspect, the thing you just did right before the crash started. But researchers have actually tested that assumption directly, in a way that quietly rules it out. In studies where people are kept awake in tightly controlled conditions, no meals at fixed times, sometimes no meals at all for a stretch, the exact same dip shows up anyway, on almost the exact same schedule. Which means the name most people use for this, the post-lunch dip, is quietly misleading. Lunch isn't the trigger. It just happens to share a time zone with something much older and far more automatic. To find the real cause, we need to look at two separate systems running inside you right now. Two curves moving on two different schedules that happen to intersect at almost exactly the worst possible moment. The first system starts the second you wake up. A molecule called adenosine begins accumulating steadily in your brain, hour by hour, for as long as you're awake. A byproduct of ongoing brain activity that builds up the way sediment settles at the bottom of a still glass of water. Piece 1. The longer you've been awake, the more adenosine has accumulated, and the heavier your basic biological pressure to sleep becomes. Sleep scientists have a name for this, the homeostatic sleep drive, or more simply, process S. S for sleep pressure. Left alone, process S would make you feel steadily, predictably more tired as the day goes on, hour after hour, in one smooth downward slope. But that isn't what most people actually experience across a normal day, and the reason is the second system. Piece 2. Running alongside process S is an entirely separate signal, generated by your circadian clock, the same suprachiasmic nucleus we've talked about before, called process C for circadian alerting signal. Its job is to actively push back against rising sleep pressure, keeping you feeling reasonably alert through most of your waking hours, despite the steady climb of process S underneath it. For most of the day, process C does its job well, more or less canceling out the slow climb of process S. This is why you don't necessarily feel more tired at noon than you did at 9 in the morning, even though sleep pressure has been quietly building the entire time. But process C isn't a flat, constant counterforce. It has its own shape across the day, and it doesn't rise smoothly from morning to night. It dips. Piece 3, and the actual reveal of this story. Research on the circadian alerting signal shows a genuine, well-documented dip in the early to mid-afternoon, often somewhere in the 2 to 4 hour window after midday, before the signal rises again later, sometimes producing a noticeable second wind in the early evening, and then falls sharply as your body prepares for sleep at night. That afternoon dip in process C lands at almost exactly the same moment process S has already been climbing for 6, 7, 8 hours since you woke up. Two independent curves on two independent schedules, intersecting in the worst possible way at almost precisely the same hour, day after day. This is why the timing feels so consistent, so oddly reliable, regardless of what you ate or didn't eat. It was never really about lunch. It's the geometry of two curves crossing, a rising sleep pressure meeting a dipping alertness signal, at a point in the day that has very little to do with food at all. There's a striking piece of supporting evidence for this, and it comes from outside the lab entirely, from history and anthropology. Across a wide range of cultures, long before refrigeration, offices, or fixed lunch hours existed, a midday rest period shows up again and again. The Mediterranean and Latin American siesta, comparable rest customs in parts of the Middle East, South Asia, and China. Researchers studying this pattern note that its timing lines up closely with the circadian dip we just described, suggesting this afternoon lull may be a genuinely old, biologically conserved feature of the human day, one that many cultures built their schedules around directly, long before anyone understood the underlying mechanism. Which puts a slightly different frame on the whole experience. The 3 p.m. crash you feel at a desk isn't a personal failing, a bad night's sleep catching up with you, or a heavy meal weighing you down. It's closer to a deeply built-in rhythm, one that much of human history simply made room for, and that a modern, unbroken 9-to-5 schedule mostly doesn't. And this is also why coffee helps, but never quite as much as people expect it to. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine from binding to its receptors. It doesn't remove the sleep pressure that's built up. It simply prevents your brain from fully registering it for a while. That directly addresses process S. It does almost nothing to process C. The circadian dip in alerting signal keeps happening regardless of how much adenosine caffeine is currently masking, which is part of why a coffee at 2:45 can blunt the afternoon crash without ever fully erasing it. Two separate systems. One cup of coffee only really touches one of them. None of this means every instance of afternoon tiredness is this same mechanism, or that it hits everyone with equal intensity. Individual chronotype, how much sleep debt has accumulated over recent nights, and overall health all shape how pronounced this dip feels day to day. And persistent, severe daytime sleepiness disproportionate to this ordinary afternoon dip is worth discussing with a doctor rather than assuming it's simply this rhythm at work. But for the reliable, everyday version, the dip that shows up on schedule, regardless of lunch, and eases again by early evening, the evidence points toward two ordinary, well-mapped biological curves, crossing paths at almost exactly the same hour, every single day. Right now, somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, someone is blaming their lunch for a heaviness that has almost nothing to do with what they ate. Two curves are quietly crossing inside them instead, one climbing since the moment they woke up, one dipping on a schedule set long before lunch existed as a concept at all. Cultures on opposite sides of the world once simply stopped and rested for it. Most modern afternoons don't allow that option, but the dip shows up right on schedule, regardless.